Well, among the many keen observers at the Supreme Court March for Life, the organization's president, Jeanne Mancini, issued a statement saying, quote, "We are encouraged by today's oral arguments in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. After nearly 50 years, most Americans want to be freed from the deadly oppression of Roe's chaotic rule." And joining me now is Amy Howe, co-founder of SCOTUSblog. Amy, great to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So first off, I'd like to get your take on the oral arguments. What did you think and what struck you the most?
It was an interesting argument. The justices are back in the courtroom for the first time this term after a full term because of COVID, but the public's not there. So it's got a very different atmosphere. So it's obviously a highly charged issue, but it didn't have the sort of sense of this really momentous argument in the sense that there wasn't a fully packed courtroom.
Right.
It's the justices, their law clerks, and a small handful of reporters who are socially distanced. And the justices have also extended the time for oral arguments. They've sort of switched up the format. So you don't have the sense that the justices are really trying to pack in the questions and are constantly interrupting each other the way that they used to and the way that they might have been if this argument had been 2 years ago, for example.
Anything that either side said that maybe really struck you, that maybe you weren't expecting?
Justice Brett Kavanaugh really came out pretty strongly. Seems to be a vote to overrule Roe versus Wade. He said that the Constitution really doesn't address abortion. It's neutral on abortion, and perhaps we should go back to getting the courts out of abortion and letting it go back to the states and letting the people address it. That was the one thing that really sort of stuck out. So it seems like Justice Thomas, Justice Samuel Alito, and Justice Kavanaugh are votes to overrule Roe versus Wade. The three liberal justices, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Justice Kagan, are votes to affirm Roe and Casey. And then it's really going to be up to the other three conservative justices, Chief Justice John Roberts, Neil Gorsuch, and Amy Coney Barrett.
And for those who maybe aren't all that familiar, we've been talking about it, we've been covering this, but for those who maybe at the heart of it don't understand this case, can you talk briefly about that? And also, we've been hearing about the debate about, the right to abortion and also the viability standard.
Sure. So the Supreme Court said in Roe and Casey that there's a constitutional right to an abortion up to the point at which the fetus becomes viable. And they say the idea is that states can't ban abortions up to the point of viability. They can impose restrictions as long as those restrictions don't place an undue burden on a woman's right to obtain an abortion. And so the state of Mississippi in this case has urged the court to overrule Roe and Casey, which would allow this 15-week ban to stand. But they've said if you don't go all of the way and overrule Roe and Casey, at the very least, you could take viability out of the equation, just look at whether or not a law imposes an undue burden. And they say in this case, the 15-week burden should still stand because it doesn't impose an undue burden, because the clinic in this case is the only clinic in Mississippi that performs abortions. It only performs abortions up to 16 weeks of pregnancy. And so eliminating that extra week, the state says, doesn't impose an undue burden.
Amy, I'm wondering, we don't have a whole lot of time left, but in those oral arguments, was there anything that maybe the Solicitor General said or the other side said that struck out to you? And how do you ultimately think this is going to shape out? I mean, you were there. Did you get a sense of how the justices may rule?
So the liberal justices that really were making the case that overruling Roe and Casey would be seen as a political act, that the Mississippi law had been introduced because of a change in the court's membership, that overruling them at this point would really undermine the court's legitimacy. I really didn't see two more votes to uphold Roe and Casey, or at the very least to strike down the law. I think the question is whether or not the court takes the step and overrules Roe and Casey, or takes the step which is where the Chief Justice John Roberts seems to be leaning to perhaps uphold the law, but not formally overrule Roe and Casey. We'll know probably in a likelihood in June.
Okay, I was just going to ask my next question was going to be, when do you think we'll get a ruling on this?
Yeah, so the justices will vote on the case this week, in all likelihood. They'll start writing opinions. But I imagine this is a case in which the justices are likely to be divided. There's likely to be multiple opinions, and it could be June, maybe even the end of June, before we see a decision.
Okay, we know that you will be following this very closely, and we'll be watching you as well. Thank you so much, Amy. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.